We've all made mistakes in our lives. We've insinuated, we've misconstrued, we've assumed, we've guessed, and we've been wrong. And Julian fell into that category in Servant Season 3, Episode 3, entitled Hair. What's going on, guys? Nick here from the Real Hero Show to talk about that episode. And we're just going to dive straight into it, so there will be spoilers. And I think the writing of this episode, in terms of, we all know that we need more answers because there is an inevitable end at the end of season 4. So now we have 7 episodes remaining in this season, and then a whole 4th season comprising of 10 episodes. And again, as I said in my last video, we would probably see members of the cult appear in this episode, which we did, and we'll get to that in just a second here. But it's almost like the topic that keeps coming up from the first 2 seasons. Is Jericho the real Jericho? And there's this hint that Leanne essentially brought him back to life, but that the caveat is that they can't exist with one. They can't exist. One can't exist without the other. So, to that extent, if that is indeed true, that's how this logic, this sort of supernatural ability here works. And in this show, then Leanne must go where Jericho must go, and vice versa, which would be really interesting when Jericho gets older. Imagine Jericho goes off to college. Was Leanne supposed to go as well? She's much more older than that, right? So, 18 years older than Jericho. So, it's strange to that extent. Or at some point, does that sort of ability just sort of stop to and cease to exist? But what I mean by that is there a certain point where Leanne can leave and then Jericho can actually live without her? Or is Jericho just alive, and that because he's been reborn to an extent, that because he's reborn, it doesn't matter if Leanne's there or not, but she wants to be there because she doesn't want to go back to the cult, and that she has, this affection for Jericho, as it's been, stated. And I think the part that obviously backfires with Julian is the hair. The fact that he gets caught, he lies to Leanne suspects something, and then he asks Roscoe for this one last favor, which he doesn't want to do because he's obviously spooked out from that whole situation, the house, the people from season 2. But that Julian's wrong. And at first I was thinking, oh my God, like this is it. This is where Julian breaks through to his sister, that Dottie is like starts to wake up, or starts to maybe comprehend that she's been wrong, because, up to this point, it's like, is she been in denial? Is she just living in this fantasy world where Jericho is hers, but it's not really because it's Leanne's. And this is the story that Julian's been living off of, that Vera's been sort of sucked into now because of Julian, because he's spilled the beans to her. And I admire Sean's take too, where he's just like, look, I just want to be a normal, happy family and live my life like everything's okay. And which I'm not going to say is completely naive or ignorant, but it's kind of like he said to Julian, like, don't mess this up. Worry about yourself. We'll worry about us. Just let it be good and let it just keep going on. And again, that could have been the take. That could have just been the extent of it, and Julian could have just left it as is. But I think for the sake of maybe character development with Julian here, is that he needed to be wrong in this sense, because it's hopefully going to allow him to stop thinking about it and go, well, maybe it is hers. And then if it is, then we just got to let this thing kind of play out, and, wondering if, Leanne is meant to be there or not. She didn't really have a freak out in this episode, like the first and the second episodes. She was courageous enough to go to the park with Sean and Jericho. And of course, in the episode, it didn't seem like they were there for long at all. Because as soon as Sean or she sees Sean talking to one of the homeless children there, or kids or teenagers, she freaks out, wants to go home, and of course that's essentially what starts it all, to where the episode ends, because the three abandoned kids, or that were, I guess, maybe all quote unquote from foster care, have now stood together at the end, and we finally see Leanne had that staple look of like freaking out with her eyes, looking, gazing out into wherever she's looking at, and of course it's sort of the same pose that her Uncle George had, and other people from the cult that she has escaped or fled from, refusing to go back to, et cetera, et cetera. But again, Sean has some ignorance here, and when I was watching it again, the segment of where Dorothy sort of uses that she changes her topic from, instead of trying to ask questions herself, she focuses on Sean, because she seemed like the crazy woman, like, oh my God, you're in my house. What are you doing in my house? I'm screaming at you, leave, to Sean, who's making them, delicious food, chicken sandwiches. That pizza looked bomb though. You can't say that pizza didn't look bomb, because I would have eaten it myself. Even though it did sound a little interesting, but again, I would have just eaten it up, because I love pizza so much. But Sean shows up and he's like the hero, he's like, oh, here, have this, it's it's good, blah blah blah, and they focus on that. And then of course, when that episode, that segment appears and airs in the news, the spotlight really isn't on Dottie so much; it's actually on Sean. And then Leanne has this statement, or this comment that you're going to be the star of the show, and he's like, no, I don't think so. And she's like, no, watch, you will be. So it's like, does she know something that we don't? Is she having this sort of like knowledge or foresight? Is it something she, wished upon or prayed about? Again, like the supernatural aspects that are within the show are very interesting, and intriguing to a sense, or a certain point here. But for the extent of what Sean has done, he's focused on their situation more than his own situation. And what I mean by that is, as he states, on the news segment, that he's been on the streets, he knows what it's like, he's been in their shoes before, so he wants to care for them. His daddy put it like stray animals, and by caring for them and showing some sort of compassion or empathy here, it's like the idea of wanting to do more and letting them into your home, literally to quote unquote use the shitter. Did that kid do something in the bathroom besides take a shit? Like, was there some sort of weird cult-ish thing that was left in there, or placed in there, or written in there? Who knows, right? The interesting thing is that Leanne doesn't know about that. I wonder what she would have done to investigate, that part, and that kind of leads me into what's coming in the next episode, and I'll get to that in just a moment here. But again, the aspect of Sean seeing what has happened from their stance, he hasn't really looked at his own situation a little bit more. I mean, his situation is that they, at any point in time, they could essentially be attacked upon by the cult. And sure, it's been over 90 days at this time, and Leanne still hasn't backed down. She's still on the lookout, because she knows it's coming at some point in time, because they are very patient, as she's stated. And Sean is just sort of over that, right? He's over Julian's take. He's over anything that's just abnormal, and wants to be normal and just do more to try and be a good person, and which he is. But I think he's let down his guard, right? Because at the end of the episode, we see the three kids are looking up at Leanne at their brownstone from the park, which is creepy, of course, and it's meant to be. And the weird part too is the one kid who he said he has a heart issue, and then the person who was videotaping him, the camera sort of cuts out, which seemed very like Paranormal Activity-ish to me, or I guess that's makes sense for something M. Night Shyamalan would do. But for the sake of not really getting answers on certain things we need answers from, from Dorothy, from, I'm sort of over the whole is it or is it not Julian. Like at this point, the real focal point here in this season is the cult. What's going to happen when the cult shows up? What's going to happen to Leanne when the cult shows up? What's going to happen to the Brownstone over time, because it's literally decaying and falling apart? And then what's going to happen with the whole family? What happens if Jericho is taken away, or what happens if Leanne's taken away and not Jericho? So there's a lot of scenarios that could play out different ways, but moving into the interesting topic of episode 4, that the Brownstone, the Turner's Brownstone actually has some issues and starts to rot and fall apart even more. So we know that it already has problems like with the sewage, the pit there in the basement, the rotting carcass in the walls with the moths, and now potentially what may or may not come from the shitting incident in their bathroom from the homeless kid. Again, was something placed in there, something that may cause the Brownstone to rot even further. So I think for the sake of what happens in episode 4, it could also be because of, again, the connection with the Brownstone and Leanne. Is Leanne freaking out a little bit more? Does she have some sort of hysterical point where it questions what's happening to the Brownstone, as well as what Dorothy and Sean Turner are thinking? And then who knows if Julian's going to be in it? Most likely, of course, since he's a main character, and what his sort of aspect will be now. That he sort of made a mistake, and maybe that again changes him a little bit more per the character development. Overall, I still think the best episode so far this season was the premiere of the first episode. I think this episode again had some, parts that are leading up to better episodes this season. I think if I give it a score, maybe out of 10, I'm throwing maybe a 7 at it. It wasn't bad by any means, but it wasn't great. I think the big points here again are, the cult is essentially on the doorstep of making their move, and that Julian has sort of come to a conclusion of him, guesstimating whether or not Jericho is or isn't Dorothy's own child with DNA testing, or whether or not it's Leanne's. It's definitely not the other mother's, because we know that for a fact now. But anyway, what did you all think? Did you guys like this episode? Did you think it was okay? Did you do you guys think we still need some answers to our questions? Again, I hope this season really starts to pick up. I kind of think that the 4th and 5th episodes may also be a little bit more of a leading up, and then the second half of the season is really where things are going to, pick up the pace and kick off into a higher gear and bring more, even more tense scenes and situations. So, but some of the mystery stuff I'm a little over of. I want to see more like pivotal points and things that are really kind of bring me closer to the edge of my seat. So, but yeah, leave your comments below. I'll be curious to see what anyone thinks, what anyone has to say, and you'll be able to catch me on next week's episode. And until then, I'll catch everyone later. Cheers.